I was looking for somewhere to clear my head. That's how all of this started. I had been working too much, barely sleeping, barely eating. The city was pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. I needed quiet, real quiet, not just the kind you get at 3 in the morning when the streetlights hum and the traffic never really stops. I wanted trees, wind, maybe even some cold air biting at my face. I wanted to be alone. I rented a cabin in the mountains, far from anything, deep enough in the woods that I wouldn't see another person for miles. It was a small place, just enough for one person. It had a main room with a wood stove, a little kitchen with a gas burner, a bedroom with a cot, and a tiny bathroom with an old sink and toilet. No shower. The water came from a well out back, and there was no electricity, just a few old oil lamps and some candles. The first night was quiet, too quiet. I hadn't realized how much I relied on the background noise of the city until I was sitting there in complete silence. No cars, no voices, not even the hum of a refrigerator. Just the sound of the wind moving through the trees, the creak of the cabin settling, and the occasional rustling of an animal outside. It should have been peaceful, but it put me on edge. Every sound felt louder, sharper, like something was just out of sight, waiting. I chalked it up to nerves. I wasn't used to being out in the woods, especially alone. I convinced myself I was just imagining things. But I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and made sure the hunting knife I had brought was within reach before I went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound outside. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, not close, but close enough. I held my breath, listening. The steps crunched through the snow, pausing every few moments before continuing. My heart pounded so hard I thought whoever was out there might hear it. I reached for my knife, gripping it so tight my fingers ached. The footsteps eventually faded, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was an animal, a deer, or something else. I didn't see any tracks when I went outside, but the wind had picked up overnight, and fresh snow had covered anything that might have been there. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. That feeling of being watched stuck with me. I spent the day chopping wood, trying to keep busy, trying to shake the paranoia. But every so often, I'd catch myself stopping, listening. The woods weren't silent anymore. I could hear the creak of branches, the distant sound of something moving through the underbrush. Every time I turned to look, there was nothing, just trees, just emptiness. That night, I locked up early. I kept the knife close, and I made sure the oil lamps were full and ready. The cabin was warm from the fire, but I couldn't relax. I sat in the chair by the stove, listening. Hours passed. Then, just when I was starting to convince myself that I was being paranoid, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. I sat frozen, barely breathing. The steps were slow, careful. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were taking their time. They stopped just outside the cabin. I could hear breathing, not mine, not an animal's, just outside the door, just standing there. I gripped the knife so hard my hand shook. I thought about calling out, but something in my gut told me not to. The breathing continued for what felt like forever. Then finally it stopped. The footsteps retreated, slow and steady, fading into the woods. I stayed awake until dawn. I didn't move. I didn't even dare to look out the window. When the first light finally crept through the trees, I got up and checked outside. There were footprints in the snow, human, leading up to the door, leading away, but nothing else. I wanted to leave. I should have left, but something kept me there. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stupidity. I told myself I'd stay one more night, just one more. That evening, I set up a trap. Nothing complicated, just a few cans and some fishing lines strung up around the cabin. If someone tried to get close, I'd hear them. I kept the knife by my side. I didn't even bother trying to sleep. The night dragged on. Hours passed. Then, just past midnight, I heard the cans rattle. I bolted upright, heart hammering. I grabbed the knife and held my breath, listening. The steps were back. Slow, careful, closer than before. Whoever it was, they knew I was inside. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They stopped at the window, just stood there. I could feel them watching. Then they moved to the door. I stood, knife raised, waiting. I wasn't going to run. Not this time. The handle rattled. Once, twice. A long pause. Then nothing. Minutes passed. An hour. Maybe more. I didn't hear them leave. Didn't hear a single step retreating. I didn't sleep. I just stood there, knife in hand, waiting for the first light. When morning finally came, I flung the door open. The snow was disturbed, but there were no footprints leading away, just the ones coming in. I packed my things in minutes. I didn't care about leaving anything behind. I got in my truck and drove until the mountains were nothing but a distant shape in my rearview mirror. I didn't stop, not until I was back in the city, back in the noise, back where people were always around. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't want to know. I just know I'll never go back. Never. I never thought I'd end up alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, but sometimes life pushes you into places you never expected. The trip was supposed to be a break from everything, a way to clear my head. The cabin belonged to an old friend who swore it was the perfect getaway. No cell service, no neighbors, just me and nature. At the time, that sounded like exactly what I needed. The drive up was long, too long. The roads turned from pavement to dirt, then narrowed until I wasn't sure if I was even on a road anymore. The trees pressed in on both sides, thick and heavy, swallowing the last bit of light as the sun went down. My GPS had stopped working miles ago. I relied on written directions, but even those felt useless in the dark. When I finally saw the cabin, I felt a little relief. It was small, made of dark wood, sitting in a clearing with nothing but trees stretching out behind it. There was a single light on the porch casting long shadows. The place looked empty, abandoned even, but I had the key. I stepped out of my car, listening to the absolute silence. No wind, no birds, just the sound of my own breathing. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood and dust. There was no electricity, just a few lanterns and a fireplace. I set my bags down and checked the place out. One bedroom, a small kitchen, a bathroom with a rust-stained sink. Simple, isolated, exactly what I had wanted. The first night, I didn't sleep well. The silence was too loud. Every tiny sound felt amplified, every creak of the wood or rustle outside making my heart jump. I told myself it was just my nerves, the adjustment to being alone. But deep down, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone. The next day, I explored the area. There was a small stream a few minutes away and a fire pit out back. But something about the woods felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. No animal tracks, no signs of life. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling got, like I was being watched. I turned back before I had planned to, a sense of unease creeping under my skin. That night, I locked the doors and windows. Felt stupid but necessary. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening. Then I heard it, a sound outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the leaves. My breath caught in my throat. Could have been an animal, but something about the rhythm was too human, too careful. I stayed still, listening. The footsteps circled the cabin. Once, twice, then silence. I waited, heart pounding, but nothing happened. Eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I checked outside. No tracks, no signs of anything, but I knew what I had heard. I considered leaving, but I had come all this way. I wasn't going to let paranoia ruin my trip. That day, I stayed close to the cabin. Every time I stepped too far into the woods, I felt that same pressure, that same unseen presence. I told myself it was in my head, but I didn't go any farther. That night, I locked everything again. I even put a chair against the door, just in case. Sleep was hard to come by. I kept waking up, sure I had heard something. Then, around 3 in the morning, I knew I wasn't imagining it. There was a sound, a scratching at the window. I didn't move. My body froze, every muscle locked. The scratching was slow, methodical, Not like an animal, more like fingers, testing, searching. Then the door handle rattled. The breath left my lungs. I stayed as still as possible, barely even blinking. The handle twisted, but the lock held. A long silence followed. Then footsteps, heavy, slow, circling the cabin again. Then nothing. I don't know how long I stayed awake, listening. But eventually, the sun rose and the sounds stopped. When I checked outside, there were no footprints, no signs of anyone. But I knew someone had been there. I packed my bags. I didn't care about the trip anymore. I needed to leave. But when I went to start my car, it wouldn't turn over. No signal on my phone. No way to contact anyone. I was stuck. The day passed in a blur of anxiety. I considered walking back the way I had come, but the thought of being out in the woods alone was worse than staying inside. I barricaded the doors, kept the fireplace lit, and sat with my back against the wall, listening. That night was the worst. The noises started early. The footsteps were faster now, more erratic, sometimes close, sometimes far. The scratching at the windows was more insistent. I could hear breathing, low, controlled. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. Then the doorknob turned again. I held my breath. It rattled harder this time. Then a bang, hard enough to shake the walls. Another bang, louder, more forceful. Then silence. I didn't sleep. I didn't move until the first light of morning. When I finally got the courage to look outside, the ground around the cabin was disturbed. Drag marks in the dirt, but no footprints, as if something heavy had been pulled through the clearing. I tried my car again. It started. I didn't question it. I didn't wait. I drove faster than I ever had in my life, not looking back. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't want to know. I only know that I'll never go back. And if you ever find yourself alone in a cabin in the woods, and you hear footsteps outside at night, don't ignore them. Don't wait. Just leave. I don't know why I thought staying in that cabin was a good idea. Maybe I just wanted to get away from everything. Work, people, the endless cycle of daily life. I had spent too much time in front of screens, too much time stuck in the same routine. The idea of isolation, of complete stillness, felt like exactly what I needed. The cabin was deep in the woods, a few miles off an old logging road. It belonged to a friend of a friend, someone I'd never met. They rarely used it anymore, and when I asked if I could stay for a week, they said yes without hesitation. It wasn't some cozy vacation home. It was an old hunting cabin, bare bones, no electricity, no running water, just a wooden structure in the middle of nowhere. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun already dipping low in the sky. The cabin was smaller than I expected, just one main room with a cot, a wood stove, and a small table. A separate shack out back served as the outhouse. There were no neighbors, no cell service, no signs of human life for miles. That was what I wanted, or at least that was what I thought I wanted. The first night was uneventful. The silence took some getting used to, but the fatigue from the long drive helped me fall asleep. When I woke the next morning, the air was crisp, colder than I had expected for that time of year. I gathered some wood from a small pile outside and got a fire going in the stove. I had packed enough food to last the week, mostly canned goods and dry snacks. There was a small creek about half a mile from the cabin where I could get water if I boiled it first. Simple, manageable. By the second day, I had explored a bit around the cabin, but there wasn't much to see. Just trees, endless trees, stretching in every direction. It was easy to lose track of time without any distractions. I spent most of the day reading, chopping some wood, and just sitting outside, listening to the wind move through the branches. The only signs of life were distant bird calls and the occasional rustling in the underbrush, probably deer or squirrels. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. That night, I woke up to a noise, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping. My first thought was an animal, maybe a raccoon or something larger, like a deer moving through the trees. But then I heard something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, not the quick, erratic movement of an animal, but steady, paced, like someone walking. The sound came from the woods behind the cabin, near the outhouse. I sat up in the cot, my breath held. I told myself it was my imagination, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, closer. I reached for the flashlight I had left on the small table beside me and clicked it on. The weak yellow beam barely illuminated the room, but through the small window, I could see the darkness outside. I listened, heart pounding, but the sound was gone. The woods were still again. Maybe it was just a branch falling. Maybe it was nothing. I told myself that over and over until sleep finally took me. The next morning, I stepped outside, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling from the night before. The air was cold, the ground damp with morning dew. I walked around the cabin, scanning the area near the outhouse where I thought I had heard the noise. Then I saw them, footprints. They weren't mine. I had only walked out that way once before, and I knew exactly where I had stepped. These prints were fresh, pressed deep into the dirt, leading from the woods to the back of the cabin. And then they stopped. Whoever had made them hadn't gone toward the door, hadn't circled the cabin. They had just stood there, facing the back wall, before turning and walking back into the woods. I felt exposed standing there, vulnerable. I scanned the trees, but there was nothing. Just the quiet, the stillness. I went inside and locked the door. I had brought a hunting knife with me, just in case, and I took it out of my bag, setting it on the table. I tried to tell myself it was just a hunter passing through, someone who had no idea I was there. But the way those footprints just stopped at the back of the cabin, the way they lingered, it didn't sit right with me. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside felt amplified. Every gust of wind a possible footstep. The old wooden walls felt too thin, the door too flimsy. I told myself if I heard anything again, I would leave at first light. But the night passed in silence. No footsteps, no noises, just my own paranoia keeping me awake. Morning came, and for a moment, I felt ridiculous. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe the footprints had been there before, and I just hadn't noticed them. I decided to stay one more day. If nothing happened, I would finish out the week as planned. That was a mistake. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I went to gather more wood. I kept glancing toward the tree line, half expecting to see something, someone standing there, but there was nothing. I stacked the wood by the door and turned to go inside. And that was when I saw it. A single boot print, right in front of the cabin door. Deep, fresh. It hadn't been there when I walked outside minutes earlier. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed my bag, my knife, and my keys, and I got into my truck. The cabin door was still wide open, but I didn't care. I started the engine, my hands shaking as I backed up onto the dirt road. As I pulled away, my headlights swept across the trees, and for just a second, I saw something. A figure just beyond the tree line, standing there, watching. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe. I just drove. I didn't tell anyone what happened when I got back. I didn't even tell the person who owned the cabin. I just said I had cut the trip short, that I hadn't felt like staying out there alone. I didn't have an explanation, no real proof that anything had happened. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that whoever was out there knew I was there too. I never wanted to spend the weekend alone in that cabin. It wasn't my idea. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, a break from the noise of the city, a place to clear my mind. My friend Mark had convinced me to go. He had been there a few months earlier, raving about how peaceful it was. Tall trees, fresh air, a lake so still it looked like glass. I had no reason to think it would be any different for me. The drive up was uneventful. I left early in the morning to beat the traffic. The highway stretched for miles, then turned into winding back roads lined with dense forest. My GPS signal died long before I reached the dirt road leading to the cabin. Mark had warned me about that, so I wasn't surprised. I followed the directions he had scribbled down on a piece of paper and drove until the road ended in front of a small wooden cabin. It looked exactly how he had described it. a bit old but well kept, with a slanted tin roof and a front porch that creaked under my weight when I stepped onto it. The door was unlocked, just as the owner had promised. Inside, it was simple: wooden floors, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a bedroom with a single bed and an old wooden dresser. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, just me, the trees, and the quiet. That first night was uneventful. I sat by the fireplace, ate a sandwich, and read a book until my eyes grew heavy. The silence was unfamiliar but not unsettling. It was just different, the kind of quiet you only find deep in the woods. No cars, no voices, just the wind moving through the trees and the occasional crack of wood shifting somewhere in the cabin. I slept well that night, too well. When I woke up, the sun was already high. I had planned to wake up early and go for a hike, but I must have been more exhausted than I thought. I made some coffee on the gas stove and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the kind that makes your lungs feel clean when you breathe it in. The lake was a short walk from the cabin, just through a narrow trail in the trees. I decided to check it out. The path was overgrown but easy enough to follow. I walked slowly, taking in the quiet, listening to the birds. The lake appeared through the trees, just as Mark had described, still and dark, reflecting the sky above. I stood there for a while, letting the calm sink in. Then, I noticed something, a sound. It was faint at first, a rustling in the trees behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see a deer or maybe a squirrel, but there was nothing, just trees. The wind, maybe. I shook it off and walked closer to the water. The surface was perfectly still, not a single ripple. I crouched down, touching it with my fingers. Ice cold, too cold for swimming. I stood up and turned back toward the trail. That's when I saw it. Footprints, not mine. They were fresh, pressed deep into the damp earth. They led from the trees to the spot where I had just been standing. I swallowed hard, my pulse picking up. Maybe they were old, from another hiker, but they looked too fresh for that, too defined. I scanned the trees, searching for any sign of movement, but the woods were empty. At least they looked empty. My chest felt tight as I followed the prints with my eyes. They stopped right where I had been standing, then vanished. No return trail, no sign of whoever made them walking away. I turned and walked back to the cabin, faster than before. I told myself I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I had thought. By the time I got back, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. The air had grown colder. I locked the door behind me, something I hadn't done the night before. I tried to distract myself with my book, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to the footprints. Then I heard it, a soft thump, outside. I froze, listening. Another thump, closer this time. I stood up, my heart pounding. The sound was coming from the porch. I moved to the window slowly, carefully. The light outside was fading, but I could still make out the wooden boards of the porch. There was nothing there. I waited, holding my breath. A full minute passed, then another. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. Probably an animal. I sat back down, trying to ignore the unease curling in my stomach. I forced myself to eat, though I wasn't hungry. When I finished, I made sure the door was locked again before heading to bed. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay there in the dark, listening to every sound, every creak of the wood, every whisper of wind outside. Sometime in the middle of the night, I must have dozed off. I woke up to the sound of something scratching against the cabin wall. I bolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. The noise was slow, deliberate, long, dragging scratches like nails running down wood. I sat there, frozen. My mind raced. An animal? A branch? My eyes flicked to the window. It was too dark to see outside. I swallowed, my throat dry. Then the scratching stopped. Silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I reached for my phone, gripping it tight even though I knew I had no signal. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it toward the window. The beam bounced off the glass, illuminating nothing but trees. I forced myself to breathe, counting each inhale, each exhale. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, exhaustion won. Morning came with a gray sky. I stepped outside, my stomach in knots. The air felt different, heavier. I circled the cabin, my skin prickling. Then I saw them, scratches, deep, jagged marks along the side of the cabin. Not from an animal. Too long, too deliberate. My pulse roared in my ears. I packed my things in record time, throwing everything into my bag without caring if it was folded or not. I didn't eat, didn't bother with coffee. I just grabbed my keys and got in my car. The engine roared to life. I backed up fast, my tires kicking up dirt. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew, deep in my gut, that I wasn't supposed to be there. I reached the highway in half the time it took me to get there. Only when I saw the first road sign, the first gas station, did I let myself breathe again. I never told Mark what happened. I never told anyone, but I never went back, and I never will. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the door, waiting for it to move again. The wind outside screamed through the trees, rattling the windows and making the old wooden beams groan. The storm had started an hour ago, heavy rain hammering down on the roof, but the sound that had woken me up wasn't the storm. It was something else, something closer. I had come out here to be alone. Just me, the quiet, and the weight of everything I'd been trying to escape. It was an old hunting cabin, long abandoned, but still standing. The owner had listed it as rustic on the site where I rented it, but that was generous. The walls were warped, the floor creaked with every step, and the smell of damp wood and dust sat heavy in the air. It was exactly what I needed. The first couple of days were fine, peaceful. I hiked in the mornings, cooked simple meals on the old gas stove, and sat on the front porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. The quiet was nice. No traffic, no ringing phone, no one asking me how I was doing with that look in their eyes. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted silence. But something changed last night. I heard something outside. It was late, long past midnight. I had been lying in bed, the only light coming from the dying embers in the fireplace. Then there was a sound, just a small one, like a footstep, came from right outside the cabin. I told myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon sniffing around for food. But the sound didn't move away, stayed just outside the window. I didn't move, I just listened. I couldn't hear breathing, no heavy footsteps, but I knew something was there. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it was gone. I stayed awake for hours, ears straining for any sign that it had come back. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself outside, circling the cabin. The ground was soft from the rain earlier that day, the mud thick and dark. There were footprints, human ones. They led up to my bedroom window and then away into the woods. I told myself it had to be a hiker, someone who got lost and wandered too close. Maybe they were just trying to find their way. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. They had stood there too long. They hadn't knocked, hadn't called out for help. They had just watched. I spent the whole day convincing myself it was nothing. But when the sun set, I couldn't relax. I locked the door, checked the windows twice. My skin prickled with the feeling that I wasn't alone. Now, as I sat there in the dark, listening to the storm rage outside, I knew I had been right. Something had woken me up again. A noise, a slow, deliberate creak of wood. The porch. I held my breath. The fire had burned down to nothing, the room cloaked in darkness. The only light came from the occasional flicker of lightning through the window. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat so loud I swore whoever was outside could hear it. Then, another creak. Closer. Someone was on the porch. I reached for the fireplace poker, gripping the cold metal in my hand. The door had a deadbolt, a heavy one, but suddenly it didn't feel like enough. The walls of the cabin, the ones that had felt so comforting just days ago, now felt thin, fragile, like they wouldn't keep anything out if it really wanted in. The doorknob rattled. I nearly dropped the poker. My breath caught in my throat. The person outside wasn't knocking. They weren't calling out. They were trying to get in. The storm roared on, Rain hammering the roof, wind howling through the trees. Another rattle of the doorknob, then silence. I waited, barely breathing. The next lightning flash lit up the room for half a second, but in that moment, I saw a shadow through the window, tall, motionless. I gripped the poker tighter, forcing my brain to work. Think. I had no cell service, no way to call for help. The car was parked down the path, but if I ran, I would have to go right past whoever was out there. Minutes passed, maybe longer. The storm covered most sounds, but I swore I heard footsteps again, this time moving around the cabin, checking the windows, testing the walls. I wanted to scream, to make noise, to let them know I wasn't some helpless thing waiting inside. But I stayed still. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I waited until the first traces of dawn lightened the sky. When I finally found the courage to move, my legs were stiff, my hands numb from gripping the poker so hard. I forced myself to the window, peering out through the rain-streaked glass. Nothing. The trees swayed, branches bending under the wind, but there was no sign of anyone, no movement, no footprints in the mud. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, but then I saw it. The door, the deadbolt was still locked, but the old wooden door frame, the one I had trusted to keep me safe, was splintered near the handle. Someone had tried to break in. I didn't pack. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, yanked the door open, and ran through the rain toward my car. The drive down the narrow, winding road was a blur, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away. Days later, after I was back home, I looked up the cabin online. The listing was gone. No record of it. No owner information. It was as if it had never existed. And then, late one night, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single message. You left the door open. I don't know why I came here alone. Maybe I just needed to get away. Work had been stressful, and my apartment felt suffocating. A few days in the woods sounded perfect. A quiet place to clear my head. I found a listing for an old cabin up in the mountains, about a 2-hour drive from the nearest town. The owner claimed it was secluded and peaceful. That was exactly what I wanted. The drive up was uneventful. I followed a winding dirt road through thick pine trees until I reached a clearing where the cabin sat. It was small, made of dark wood, and looked old but sturdy. The front porch sagged a little and the windows were dusty. Behind it, the forest stretched for miles. There were no other cabins or houses nearby, just endless trees. I stepped out of my car, took a deep breath of crisp mountain air, and immediately felt better. No city noise, no car horns, no people talking. Just wind rustling through the trees and the occasional chirp of a bird. I grabbed my bag, locked the car, and made my way inside. The cabin smelled of wood and something faintly musty. Dust motes floated in the sunlight filtering through the windows. There was a small kitchen, a couch, a fireplace, and a single bedroom. Basic, but cozy enough. I set my bag down, opened a couple of windows to air the place out, and started unpacking. I had brought a few books, some canned food, a flashlight, extra batteries, and a knife. Not that I thought I'd need it, but it felt smart to have one out here. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell signal, and no electricity, just an old generator out back that I had to start manually. I tested it, and it rumbled to life, giving me some dim light inside. That would have to do. By the time I got settled, the sun was setting. The temperature dropped fast, and the forest seemed to change. The cheerful rustling of leaves in the breeze turned into something else, something heavier, more deliberate. I shook it off, telling myself I was just unused to being out in the wild. I made a simple dinner, ate by candlelight, and decided to call it a night. That first night, I barely slept. Every sound was unfamiliar. The creaks of the cabin settling, the wind pressing against the walls, the branches scratching at the roof. But something else kept me awake. I kept feeling like I wasn't alone, like someone or something was just outside. More than once, I grabbed my flashlight and shined it through the window, but all I saw was darkness and the occasional tree swaying. I forced myself to ignore it. Morning came and I felt stupid. Of course, my mind was playing tricks on me. That's what happened when you left behind the city and its constant background noise. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the sun climb over the trees. It was beautiful, peaceful. This was why I came. I decided to explore a little. I had a map, and the owner had marked a few hiking trails. I picked one that looped around a nearby creek and set off. The forest was thick, and after a while, I couldn't hear anything but my own footsteps. It was an odd feeling, like I had stepped into a different world. About an hour in, I found something strange. A pile of rocks stacked neatly in a small clearing. Not random, like they tumbled that way, but placed on top of each other deliberately. Something about it unsettled me. Felt wrong, like I had stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. I told myself it was just a marker, maybe for another trail, but I picked up my pace. On the way back, I saw something else. Near the path, half buried in the dirt, was a shoe. A single, muddy hiking boot, old and worn. It looked like it had been there for years. My stomach twisted. Who leaves just one shoe in the middle of nowhere? I hurried back to the cabin. By the time I got there, the sun was already dipping lower. I told myself I was overreacting. This was the wilderness, people lost things all the time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here before me, and they had left in a hurry. That night, the unease grew worse. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound outside. Not the wind, not an animal. Footsteps, slow, careful. I held my breath and listened. They circled the cabin once, then again. My heart pounded. I reached for my knife but didn't move. The footsteps stopped at the front door. Silence. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. Then, finally, I heard them retreating, fading into the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun rose, I packed my things. I didn't care how much time I had left on my rental. I wasn't staying another night. I threw my bag into the car, started the engine, and took one last look at the cabin. That's when I saw them. Deep in the tree line, barely visible, was a figure, standing still, watching me. I didn't wait to see if they would move. I hit the gas and sped down the dirt road, my tires kicking up dust and gravel. I didn't stop until I reached the town, my hands still shaking on the wheel. I don't know who or what was out there. Maybe just some hermit, some wanderer living off the land. Maybe someone who didn't like strangers in their woods. Or maybe it was something worse. All I know is that I won't be going back. Ever. I never wanted to stay at the cabin in the first place. It wasn't mine. It belonged to a friend of a friend, someone I barely knew. The guy had offered it up when I mentioned needing a quiet place to clear my head. Take it for the weekend, he said. Nobody's been up there in months. I should have taken that as a warning. It was an old one-room structure deep in the woods, the kind of place built for hunting trips and weekend getaways, not long stays. The nearest town was miles away, and the dirt road leading in was so narrow and overgrown that I almost missed the turn. When I finally arrived, the cabin looked worse than I expected. Weathered wood, a sagging roof, and a porch with loose planks. I had no choice but to go in. The sun was already dipping behind the trees, and there was no way I was driving back in the dark. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the stale smell of wood and old fabric. There was a single bed against the far wall, a small wooden table with 2 chairs, and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A rusty old stove sat in the corner, and a small counter held a few cans of expired food. No running water, no electricity, just me, my bag, and whatever had been left behind. The first night was uneventful, but I barely slept. The silence wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. Every tiny noise stood out. The creak of the wood as it settled, the rustling of leaves outside, the occasional thud of something in the distance. I told myself it was just animals, probably deer, maybe a raccoon. It wasn't until the second night that I realized something was wrong. I had just turned in, lying on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. The fire was burning low, casting weak orange light around the room. Then a sound. A faint shuffling outside. Not the wind, not leaves. Something moving. I held my breath, listening. The noise stopped. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but my gut told me otherwise. Then it started again. Slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin. I felt every muscle in my body tense. I reached for my flashlight and pointed it toward the window, but all I could see was my own reflection in the glass. I forced myself to stay still, to listen. The steps were soft but steady, moving just beyond the porch. My brain raced, trying to rationalize it. A lost hiker? A hunter? But why wouldn't they call out? Why wouldn't they knock? Then came the tapping. A single, deliberate tap against the wooden wall. Not hard, just enough to make itself known. Then another, closer this time. I gripped my flashlight tighter, heart pounding. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but I knew better. Animals don't tap. Animals don't move with purpose like that. I had my truck outside, but the keys were in my bag near the table, too far away to grab without making noise. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, listening. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the tapping stopped. The night went still again, but I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. I just lay there waiting. Morning came, and with it, a false sense of safety. I told myself I had imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I stepped outside, I saw them. Footprints. They weren't mine. They were fresh, circling the cabin. Some led off into the woods, disappearing into the trees. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I needed to leave. Now, I packed up in minutes, shoving everything into my bag. As I stepped onto the porch, I scanned the tree line. Nothing. But that didn't mean no one was there. My truck was parked a few feet away, and I moved fast, yanking the door open, tossing my bag inside. The keys were in my pocket. I slid them into the ignition, heart hammering. The engine sputtered but didn't start. I turned the key again. Nothing. The third time, the engine cranked, groaning to life. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. In the rearview mirror, something moved. Just at the edge of the trees, too far to make out clearly, but close enough that I knew I wasn't alone. A figure, standing still, watching. I slammed the truck into reverse, nearly backing into a tree as I turned onto the narrow road. My hands were shaking, my breath coming fast. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I didn't go home right away. I drove straight to the nearest town, pulled into a gas station, and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. I tried to tell myself I had overreacted, that it could have been anyone. A hunter, a local, someone who had just happened to be nearby. But I knew better. Those footsteps, the tapping, the figure in the trees. That cabin wasn't empty, and I don't think it ever had been. I didn't plan on staying in that cabin. It was meant to be a quick stop, a place to rest before finishing the long drive home. I'd been on the road for hours, exhaustion pressing against my skull like a vice. The highway stretched endlessly in the darkness, the trees on either side blurring together. My eyes burned from staring at the road, and every mile felt longer than the last. When I saw the sign for a small roadside lodge, I decided to pull off. I just needed sleep, nothing more. The gas station next to the lodge had a dim yellow light buzzing above the door, and I figured I could get some snacks before heading in. Inside, an old man stood behind the counter, barely acknowledging me as I walked in. The air smelled stale, mixed with the faint scent of motor oil. I grabbed a bottle of water and some chips, setting them on the counter. "You staying at the lodge?" the man asked, his voice scratchy like he hadn't spoken much that day. "Yeah, just for the night." He slid the snacks toward me, nodding slowly. "Storm's comin'. Might want to stay put till it passes." I hadn't checked the weather, but I could feel the heaviness in the air. The sky outside was an endless stretch of black, clouds swallowing any trace of moonlight. I paid, thanked him, and walked out. The lodge itself was a small, single-story building with peeling paint and a faded sign hanging above the entrance. A young woman sat behind the counter inside, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up as I asked for a room. "Cabin's out back," she muttered, handing me a key. "Number 4. I stepped back outside, following the narrow dirt path that led behind the main building. The cabins sat in a row, barely visible in the dim porch lights. Number 4 was on the far end, half hidden by trees. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It was small, just a bed, a rickety wooden chair, and a tiny bathroom. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something else I couldn't place. I locked the door behind me, tossed my bag onto the chair, and sat on the bed, feeling the springs creak beneath me. The wind had picked up outside, whistling through the trees. I could hear branches scraping against the cabin's walls. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the exhaustion was making me jumpy. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl. Then I heard it, a sound just outside the cabin. Not the wind, not the trees. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the dirt and leaves. I held my breath, heart pounding. Could have been another guest. Maybe someone from the main lodge walking back to their cabin. But the steps didn't move past, they stopped. Right outside my door. I sat up slowly, straining to hear. The wind howled again, drowning out everything. For a few minutes, there was nothing. Then a soft, dragging sound against the wooden porch. I reached for my phone, hand shaking. No service. I cursed under my breath, staring at the screen, trying to steady my breathing. Another noise, a light scraping against the door. I stood up, moving as quietly as I could. The cabin had no peephole, no way to see outside without opening the door. I debated turning off the light, but the idea of sitting in the dark was somehow worse. Minutes passed. The wind raged, and the trees groaned, but nothing else came. I stayed frozen, ears straining for any sound. Then, as quickly as it started, the noise was gone. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling until the first hints of morning light crept through the window. When I finally worked up the nerve to open the door, my stomach twisted. A set of footprints led from the trees to my door, and none leading back. I still don't know what to make of what happened that weekend. Even now, months later, it lingers in the back of my mind, creeping up when I least expect it. It started as a simple plan, just me, a remote cabin, and a break from everything. No cell service, no internet, no distractions. Just me and the quiet. It sounded perfect. The drive up was uneventful. The road twisted through dense trees, a mix of towering pines and skeletal birches. The cabin was exactly as I had expected, small, old, but sturdy. The wood was dark with age, the windows framed in chipped white paint. A single porch wrapped around the front, overlooking the thick forest. It sat alone, miles from the nearest house or town. That was the whole point. Inside, it was just as simple. A small kitchen, a living area with a sagging couch, a fireplace with a neatly stacked pile of logs. A short hallway led to the single bedroom and a cramped bathroom. It smelled like dust and old wood, but I didn't mind. It was peaceful. I unpacked my things, just a duffel bag with enough clothes for a few days, a book, some food, and a flashlight. The sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows across the trees. I locked the door, checked the windows, then settled into the couch with my book. The silence was thick. The only sounds the occasional rustle of wind against the trees or the distant hoot of an owl. It wasn't until I turned in for the night that I noticed something odd. The bed was cold. Not just cold, but damp, like the sheets had been left out in the rain and never dried properly. I peeled them back, feeling the fabric, but there was no sign of water damage, just that strange clamminess that sent a shiver through me. I considered sleeping on the couch, but told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just an old cabin. The walls held moisture, the sheets were just unused for too long. I forced myself to ignore it. The first night was restless. The silence I had craved now felt oppressive, too heavy. Every small noise became something bigger in my mind. A creak of the wood, a distant crack of a branch outside. I tossed and turned, finally drifting into an uneasy sleep. I woke up feeling groggy, my mouth dry. The air in the cabin felt different, thicker, maybe. I shrugged it off, made coffee, and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was crisp, the sun filtering through the trees. It should have felt refreshing, but something about the woods unsettled me. They were too still. No birds, no wind, just silence stretching between the trees like something waiting. The day passed uneventfully. I read, chopped some wood for the fireplace, and went for a short walk. The trails behind the cabin were narrow, winding deeper into the woods. It was beautiful but disorienting. The trees all looked the same, the path barely noticeable at times. I made sure not to go too far. That night, I woke up to a sound. It was soft, barely there. A faint rustling, like something moving outside the window. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped. I told myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, but the unease settled into my stomach, refusing to leave. The next morning, I found something that made my skin crawl. Footprints. Not just animal tracks, human footprints leading from the trees to the porch, stopping right at the front door. My door. My mind raced. Had I locked the door last night? Couldn't remember. My heart pounded as I checked. Locked. The windows, too. Everything was secure. But someone had been here, watching. I tried to shake it off. Maybe a hiker got lost. Maybe it was nothing. I considered leaving, but I had come here to be alone. I wouldn't let paranoia ruin that. Still, I kept the axe closer that day, setting it next to the couch as I read. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made my muscles tense, my fingers gripping the flashlight beside me. Hours passed. Then, just as I was finally drifting off, I heard it again. Rustling, a faint creak of wood. The porch. Someone was on the porch. I stayed still, barely breathing. The doorknob rattled, not forcefully but testing. My chest felt tight. My mind screamed at me to do something, but all I could do was stare at the dark ceiling. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then, slowly, the footsteps retreated, back into the trees. I lay there until morning, my body frozen. When the first light crept through the curtains, I forced myself up, gripping the axe so tightly my knuckles turned white. The footprints were back, clearer this time. They led from the trees to the porch to my door, then back again. I packed my things in under 10 minutes. My hands shook as I stuffed clothes into my bag. I didn't care about breakfast, didn't care about anything except getting out. I yanked open the door, stepping onto the porch, and stopped. Something was hanging from the porch beam. A small bundle of twigs, wrapped together with a strip of fabric. My fabric, from my duffel bag. My stomach lurched. Someone had been inside. Someone had been in the cabin while I slept. I didn't look back as I got in my car and drove. The tires spun against the dirt, kicking up dust as I tore down the winding road. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, until the cabin was miles behind me. Even now, I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted, and I don't want to know. I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear the creak of the porch, the soft rustle of movement outside my window. I don't think I'll ever go back. I never planned on staying in the cabin alone. It was supposed to be a weekend retreat with a few friends, a way to escape the noise of the city and breathe in the cold mountain air. But one by one, they all bailed. Work, family issues, last-minute excuses that left me packing my truck alone. I told myself it didn't matter. A few days of peace and quiet sounded good. The drive up was longer than I remembered. The road twisted through miles of dense forest. The trees packed so close together that they swallowed most of the sunlight. No cell service out here, not that I expected any. I had downloaded some movies, packed enough food, and brought plenty of firewood. The idea was to unplug, to enjoy the solitude. The cabin itself was old, but solid. A single-story structure with a slanted roof and a wide porch that faced nothing but trees. It had belonged to my uncle before he passed, and my family still used it from time to time. Inside, it smelled like aged wood and dust. The furniture was basic, a worn-out couch, a rocking chair, a wooden dining table with mismatched chairs. The kitchen had an old propane stove and a tiny fridge powered by a generator out back. I settled in quickly, unpacking my bags in the only bedroom. The bed creaked under my weight, but the mattress was firm. After setting up, I went outside, splitting some logs and stacking them by the fireplace for later. The sun was already low, and the forest grew darker by the minute. The silence was thick, almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The first night was uneventful. I made a simple meal, watched half a movie on my laptop, and turned in early. The wind picked up outside, and I could hear the creak of tree branches rubbing against each other. A few times, I thought I heard something moving outside, but every time I looked through the window, I saw nothing but blackness, probably just an animal. I reminded myself that I was deep in the woods, surrounded by nature. It was nothing to be afraid of. The second day, I went hiking. The trails around the cabin were overgrown, but I knew them well enough. I walked for hours, following the path up a ridge that overlooked the valley. The air was crisp, the smell of pine strong in my nose. I sat on a rock, staring at the endless expanse of trees. No people, no roads, just wilderness. Felt good. By the time I made it back to the cabin, the sky had darkened. I started a fire in the fireplace, made some dinner, and settled in for another quiet night. That's when I noticed something strange. The door. It was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. I checked it again, turning the knob to make sure. Maybe I had forgotten. I was in a hurry when I left, but something about it unsettled me. I did a quick check around the cabin. Everything seemed in place. My bags were untouched. The kitchen looked the same. Still, I kept feeling like something was off. I brushed it off and forced myself to relax. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness in its place. Every sound felt magnified, the crackling fire, the shifting of the wooden walls. And then I heard it, a soft creak. Not the wind, not the house settling, something else. I sat up in bed, my ears straining. Silence. I told myself it was nothing, but my body was tense. I lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. For what felt like hours, I lay there listening, waiting. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. The back door, the one leading to the porch, was slightly open. I hadn't used that door. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. Had I left it open? No, I was sure I hadn't. I stepped outside, scanning the trees. Nothing, just the same endless forest. But my gut told me something was wrong. I decided to leave early. I packed my bags, loaded the truck, and went to start the engine. It didn't turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead. I checked under the hood, but I wasn't an expert. Everything looked fine, but the truck wouldn't start. I was stuck. My only option was to wait until morning and hike down to the nearest road. It was miles away, but I didn't have a choice. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fireplace, gripping a hunting knife I found in one of the drawers. Every creak of the wood made my skin crawl. The fire burned low, casting long shadows. Then, in the middle of the night, I heard it again. A sound outside. Footsteps. Not an animal. Something deliberate. I held my breath. The sound moved around the cabin. Slow. Calculated. Then the doorknob rattled. I gripped the knife tighter, my heart hammering. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. The rattling stopped. Silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then, footsteps again, moving away, fading into the trees. I stayed awake until dawn. When the first light hit, I grabbed my backpack and left. I walked fast, barely stopping to rest. Hours later, I reached the road, flagged down a passing truck, and got the hell out of there. A few days later, I came back with a tow truck to get my vehicle. The battery was fine. The truck started on the first try. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But someone had been there, watching, waiting. I never went back. I I don't know why I thought spending a weekend alone in a remote cabin was a good idea. I told myself I needed the solitude, a break from city noise, work stress, and constant distractions. The idea of disconnecting from my phone, reading by the fireplace, and hiking through quiet woods sounded perfect. So, I booked a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods of northern Maine. It was miles away from the nearest town, no neighbors in sight, just me, the trees, and silence. That was the plan, at least. The drive up was peaceful at first, but the further I got from civilization, the more uneasy I felt. The roads turned from asphalt to dirt, the trees grew thicker, and the sky seemed darker. I reminded myself that this was exactly what I wanted: seclusion. I kept driving until I found the narrow path leading to the cabin. The place was exactly as advertised. Small, old, but sturdy, with a stone chimney and a single porch light. There was no cell service, but that didn't bother me much. I wanted to be alone, after all. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and took in the place. It smelled like old wood and dust. The furniture was basic: a couch, a wooden table, a small kitchen with an ancient fridge, and a single bedroom with a creaky bed. There was a bathroom with weak water pressure and a single mirror that was so scratched and cloudy, I could barely see my reflection. The fireplace was the only thing that looked well maintained, which was good because the temperature was dropping fast. I spent the first evening settling in. I gathered some firewood from the stack outside, started a fire, and read a book while listening to the wind howl through the trees. Everything felt normal, peaceful. It wasn't until I went to bed that I noticed something was off. The bed was uncomfortable, but I was tired from the long drive, so I forced myself to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure why at first. The fire had died down, and the room was nearly pitch black except for the faint glow of the moon coming through the window. Then I heard it, a sound outside, a slow, deliberate crunching of leaves. Something was moving in the woods, close to the cabin. My heart pounded in my chest. I told myself it was probably an animal, a deer maybe, but then I heard it again, closer this time. And then it stopped. Total silence. I held my breath, straining my ears. Nothing. I was about to turn over and try to sleep when I heard another noise. This time, from inside the cabin, came from the kitchen, a soft creak, like the sound of wood shifting. I stared at the open doorway, my body frozen in place. The cabin was old. It could have been settling, but something about the silence that followed felt unnatural, like something was waiting, watching. I lay there for what felt like hours, barely breathing. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through the window. I sat up quickly, my heart still pounding. I checked the cabin. Everything looked normal. The kitchen was exactly as I had left it. The front door was locked. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake off the unease from the night before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every so often, I thought I heard movement in the trees, but when I stopped to listen, there was nothing, just the wind. That night, I double-checked the locks, made sure the fire was burning bright, and even wedged a chair under the doorknob just in case. I told myself I was being paranoid, but that feeling, that sense of being watched, never went away. I don't know what time I woke up, but the fire had gone out again, and the room was freezing. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, I heard breathing. Slow, steady breathing. Close. It was coming from the doorway of my bedroom. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The darkness was thick, but I could just barely make out a shape. A figure standing in the doorway, completely still. My mind was screaming at me to do something, anything, but my body refused to move. And then, it stepped forward. I reacted without thinking. I grabbed the flashlight and turned it on, aiming the beam toward the figure. The light hit the doorway, but there was nothing there. My heart was hammering. I scrambled out of bed, turned on every light in the cabin, and checked every inch of the place. The doors were still locked. The windows were shut. There was no sign of forced entry, but I knew what I heard. I knew what I saw. I didn't sleep after that. I sat by the fireplace, gripping the flashlight, waiting for morning. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my bags and left. I didn't care about the 2 nights I had left on my rental. I didn't even stop to check out, I just drove. And I didn't stop until I was hours away from that place. I don't know who or what was out there. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was just on edge. But I've never felt fear like that before. And I've never been back to the woods since. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the stress of city life, or maybe I just wanted to see if I could still be alone without losing my mind. I rented a small, off-grid cabin deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. It wasn't much, just a 1-room wooden box with a bed, a wood stove, and an outhouse about 50 yards away. There was no electricity, no plumbing, and the only connection I had to the outside world was an old CB radio that crackled every now and then but never carried a voice. The drive up was rough. My truck barely made it through the winding dirt roads, and by the time I arrived, the sun was already dipping behind the trees. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant rustling of branches in the wind. It was peaceful, but there was something about the quiet that felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. I spent the first night getting settled, chopping wood for the stove, and making a simple meal on a propane burner I had brought. When I stepped outside to use the outhouse, I noticed how dark it was. Pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. My flashlight barely cut through it. The woods stood like a wall around me, tall and unmoving. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the reach of the light, watching. The first couple of days were uneventful. I kept busy, fishing in the nearby stream, reading, and taking long hikes through the dense forest. I told myself the solitude was good for me, that it was exactly what I needed. But at night, the silence became oppressive. Every creak of the cabin, every distant snap of a twig outside made my skin crawl. I told myself it was just animals. But then I started noticing things. The first thing was small. I had left my axe stuck in the chopping block one evening, only to find it buried deep in a tree stump 20 feet away the next morning. I had no memory of moving it. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I had done it without thinking. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Then I found the footprints. They were faint in the dirt behind the cabin, but they were there, barefoot, human, not mine. The prints led from the trees to my cabin and then disappeared. I searched the area, called out, listened. Nothing, just the wind whispering through the leaves. That night, I locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle, and kept my axe by my bed. I barely slept. I kept hearing noises outside, soft footsteps circling the cabin, stopping just beneath the window. I forced myself not to look. If I didn't see, maybe it wasn't real. Morning came, and I told myself I was imagining things, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't ignore what I found next. About 100 yards from the cabin, in a small clearing, there was something new. A deer, or what had been one. Its body was torn open, ribs exposed, its head twisted at an impossible angle. The strange thing was that there was no blood. It hadn't been killed there. Something had dragged it, placed it. For me, that was the moment I knew I wasn't alone. I packed my things, shoving clothes and supplies into my bag with shaking hands. I didn't care about the rest. I just wanted to be gone. I ran to my truck, heart pounding, but when I turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. I tried again. Nothing. I popped the hood, hoping it was something simple. That's when I saw it, wires cut clean through. Someone had done this. Someone wanted me here. I ran back inside and locked the door. My only chance was the CB radio. I turned the dial, static filling the room, my voice shaking as I called for help. I waited. Nothing. Then, a voice, just a whisper through the static. A single word. Stay. I dropped the receiver. My breath was loud in the tiny cabin. My hands shook. I waited, hoping, praying it had been a trick of the radio. But then something outside scratched against the wall. Slow, deliberate, Not an animal, not the wind. I spent that night awake, clutching the axe, listening. The scratching came and went, moving around the cabin. Then it stopped. Silence stretched on for hours, thick and suffocating. When the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I risked a glance outside. The clearing was empty. No footprints, no signs of anything. But hanging from the porch beam, swinging gently in the breeze, was a length of wire. My truck's wire. I didn't wait. I grabbed my pack and ran, not stopping, not thinking, just moving. The road back to town was miles away, but I didn't care. I ran until my legs gave out, then walked. I didn't stop until I saw another person, a hunter, who took one look at me and asked what had happened. I couldn't answer. I never went back for my things. I never asked about the cabin or who had been there before me. I just left, and I never looked back. And even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing, sure that I can hear something scratching at my door. It was deep in the woods, miles away from anything. No cell service, no neighbors, nothing but trees and silence. My uncle owned it, used it for hunting, but ever since he passed, no one had touched the place. My dad asked me to go check on it, see if it was still standing, make sure no squatters had taken it over. I didn't want to, but I owed my dad. And besides, I thought it's just a cabin. The drive up was long. The road barely even a road anymore. More like a narrow dirt path, overgrown with weeds, branches clawing at my truck like they were trying to keep me out. I almost turned around a few times, but I told myself I was being stupid. I wasn't scared. It was just a rundown old cabin in the woods. By the time I reached it, the sun was starting to set. The place looked worse than I remembered. The wood was rotting, the roof sagging, windows dirty and fogged over. The front door was still locked, but the handle felt loose, like someone had messed with it. I told myself it was just the weather, just years of no maintenance. Inside, it smelled damp and stale, like old wood and mildew. I checked each room, flashlight in hand since the power didn't work. Everything was where my uncle had left it. Dusty furniture, hunting gear, empty beer cans. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like the air was different, heavier. I checked the kitchen, the small bedroom, even the crawl space beneath the cabin. Nothing. But when I walked back into the main room, I noticed something I hadn't before. The old rocking chair near the fireplace. It was turned slightly, just enough to be noticeable. I stared at it, heart pounding. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I'd bumped it when I walked in. But I knew I hadn't. I told myself I was being stupid. I sat on the couch, opened the beer I brought, and tried to relax. The sun had dipped below the trees, and the forest outside the window was nothing but blackness. I could hear the wind picking up, branches swaying, leaves rustling. Then I heard something else. A thump, faint but clear, like something shifting inside the cabin. I held my breath, listening. Another thump, this time closer. I stood up slowly, flashlight in hand, scanning the room. Nothing. But then I noticed the rocking chair. It was turned even more. I felt a chill run through me. My stomach knotted. I took a slow step toward it, my boots creaking on the old wooden floor. The chair sat still, motionless, like it always had. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it had moved. I turned away, convincing myself I was just paranoid. I walked back to the couch, and that's when I heard it. A sound so faint, I almost thought I imagined it. A slow, deep inhale, like someone breathing in, steady and deliberate. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't the wind. It was inside the cabin. Close. I turned, flashlight shaking in my grip. I scanned the room, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. I saw nothing, just the old furniture, the empty fireplace, the same dusty corners. Then I saw the door to the bedroom. It was open now. I knew I had closed it when I checked the cabin earlier. I was sure of it. My legs felt heavy, locked in place. My brain screamed at me to move, to run, but I forced myself to step forward. The door creaked as I pushed it open wider. My flashlight beam swept across the room. Bed, dresser, closet. The closet door was slightly open. My breathing was too loud. I could hear my own heartbeat. I reached out and yanked the closet door open, stepping back instantly. Nothing. Just old coats, some hunting gear, a few cardboard boxes. I let out a shaky breath. I was losing my mind. It was an old cabin, creaky and settling. That was all. I walked back into the main room, grabbed my bag, and decided I was sleeping in my truck. No way I was staying inside that place all night. As I turned to leave, my flashlight flickered, just for a second. But in that second, I saw something. The rocking chair was facing me now. I bolted. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I jumped into my truck, started it up, and sped down that narrow dirt road like something was chasing me. Maybe something was. I didn't stop driving until I was back on the highway, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel, my heart still racing. I told my dad the place was fine, but that we should just let it rot. Leave it to the trees, let nature take it back. He didn't ask why, and I didn't tell him. I still dream about that cabin sometimes. The smell of it, the silence, the way the chair moved when I wasn't looking. I never went back. I never will. The road was nothing but a narrow strip of dirt and gravel, winding through endless trees. The deeper I drove, the fewer signs of life I saw. No houses, no cars, no streetlights, just thick forest pressing in on either side. The GPS had long stopped working, leaving me with an old, printed map that felt useless in the growing darkness. I was already regretting this trip. A week alone in a cabin sounded peaceful when I booked it. A break from work, from people, from noise. But now, with the sky dimming and the air heavy with the scent of damp earth, I felt uneasy. The cabin was deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. It belonged to a friend of a friend who offered it to me for free. The only condition was that I had to bring my own supplies because there was no running water and barely any electricity, just a generator for emergencies. That didn't bother me when I agreed to it, but now, being this far out, it did. The drive seemed to stretch longer than it should. I checked the map again, my headlights casting a weak glow against the paper. I should have reached the turnoff by now, but the trees all looked the same, and I hadn't seen any markers for miles. Then, just as I was about to turn around, I spotted it. A barely visible dirt path leading off the road. The cabin's driveway. The tires crunched over twigs and loose stones as I made the turn. The path was rough, the trees almost brushing against my car. When I finally broke through into a small clearing, the cabin stood before me. It was old, smaller than I expected, with a sagging roof and weathered wooden walls. A single porch light flickered, struggling to stay on. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but the endless woods behind me. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at it. The place looked abandoned. I told myself it was just the isolation, the unfamiliar quiet, but my stomach twisted as I stepped out of the car. I grabbed my bags and made my way up the porch steps. The wood groaned under my weight. My key jammed in the lock at first, but after some force, the door creaked open. The air inside was thick, stale, carrying the scent of dust and old wood. The cabin was simple. A main room with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen area, and a single bedroom in the back. The furniture was sparse, just an old couch, a wooden table, and a few chairs. A single light bulb dangled from the ceiling, barely lighting the space. I dropped my bags and turned back to the door, locking it behind me. I wasn't scared, just cautious. The first night was uneventful. I ate a cold sandwich, read for a bit by flashlight, and then climbed into bed. The sheets smelled musty, but I was too tired to care. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the cabin creaked every now and then. I told myself it was normal. Old wood shifts, the forest is alive. I slept poorly. At some point in the night, I woke up to silence. Not just the quiet of the woods, but an unnatural stillness. No wind, no insects, just a thick, suffocating silence. Then came the sound. A soft, deliberate crunch outside my window, like a footstep. I held my breath, listening. Another crunch, closer this time. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I forced myself to sit up, to peek through the curtain. Nothing but trees, just the outline of the woods under the moonlight. But something felt off. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and shone it outside. The beam cut through the dark, sweeping across the clearing. Nothing. No movement. No signs of anyone. Still, I locked the bedroom door before getting back into bed. Sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just an animal. A deer, a raccoon, maybe even just my imagination. I tried to shake off the feeling, but I couldn't. Later that day, I went to gather some firewood. The air was cold, and I figured I might as well make use of the fireplace. I wandered a bit into the trees, keeping the cabin in sight. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Not mine. They were fresh, pressed deep into the damp earth. They led from the tree line to the side of the cabin, right up to my bedroom window. I froze, my body screaming at me to run. But I forced myself to think. Maybe someone had been passing through. Maybe a lost hiker. That had to be it. I hurried back inside, bolting the door behind me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every sound made my nerves spike. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. That night, I barely slept. I stayed awake, flashlight clutched in my hand, ears straining for any sound. Then, around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. Crunch. My grip on the flashlight tightened. Crunch. Closer this time, right outside the window. I forced myself to sit up, my pulse hammering in my throat. The curtain was cracked just enough for me to see the outline of trees. But there was something else. A shape just at the edge of the woods. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared, hoping, praying. It was just my imagination. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, it stepped back into the trees. I stayed awake until dawn. When the sun finally rose, I packed my bags and got the hell out of there. I never found out who or what was out there. Maybe it was just some drifter, maybe someone living off the grid. But I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back. I don't know why I agreed to stay in that cabin alone. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe I wanted to escape from everything for a while. But now, looking back, I realize how stupid I was. The cabin belonged to an old family friend, a retired ranger who spent most of his life in the mountains. He told me about it a few times, said it was peaceful, a good place to clear your head. When he offered to let me use it for a weekend, I said yes without thinking too much about it. I packed my bag, filled my truck with gas, and drove 3 hours deep into the wilderness, far from anything familiar. The drive up was beautiful at first, the kind of scenery you see in magazines. Tall trees, rolling hills, endless sky. But the deeper I got, the more isolated I felt. The road turned from pavement to dirt, winding through thick forest, getting narrower as I went. My GPS stopped working about halfway there, and I relied on the printed directions my friend had given me. When I finally reached the cabin, it was already late afternoon. The place was small but sturdy, built from thick logs, with a slanted roof and a stone chimney. A single porch wrapped around the front, overlooking the trees below. No neighbors, no power lines, no cell signal, just me and the woods. I stepped inside, and the smell of old wood and dust filled my nose. The inside was basic, one main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, a single bedroom, and a bathroom. Everything looked untouched, like no one had been there in months. I dropped my bag by the couch and walked around, familiarizing myself with the place. The windows were covered with thick curtains, making it feel even darker inside. There was a stack of firewood by the hearth, a few cans of food in the kitchen, and an old rifle mounted on the wall. I wasn't much of a hunter, but I liked knowing it was there. As night fell, the forest outside came alive with sounds. Branches creaked, leaves rustled. Unseen things moved in the darkness. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just nature. But there was something about being out there alone that made every noise seem unnatural, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I built a fire, cooked some canned soup, and sat in silence, listening. The wind howled through the trees, making the walls groan. The cabin felt solid enough, but the loneliness started to settle in. I thought about turning on some music, but my phone was useless out there. No signal, no Wi-Fi, just silence and the flickering light of the fire. I went to bed early, hoping to sleep off the uneasy feeling, but it didn't work. The bed was stiff, the blankets smelled musty, and I kept waking up to the sound of branches scraping against the roof. At one point, I swore I heard something heavier, something moving just outside the cabin. I held my breath, listening, but after a few minutes, it was quiet again. Just my imagination, I told myself. The next morning, I stepped outside and found footprints in the dirt. Not animal tracks, human footprints. They circled the cabin, leading from the tree lean to the porch, stopping just outside the front door. My stomach tightened. I knew for a fact I hadn't walked around the cabin the night before. I scanned the woods, expecting to see someone standing there, watching, but there was nothing, just trees and silence. Whoever had been there was gone now. I checked the door, but it was still locked from the inside. Nothing was missing, nothing was out of place, but someone had been here. I told myself it was probably a hiker, maybe a hunter passing through. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. Why would someone come all the way up to this cabin in the middle of the night and just stand outside? And why didn't they knock? I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but I convinced myself to stay. It was just one more night, and I didn't want to be paranoid over nothing. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake the unease. The forest was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, listening for footsteps that never came. By the time I got back, the sun was setting. I locked the door, made another fire, and tried to relax. But the moment it got dark, that feeling returned, stronger than before. I sat by the fire, staring at the front door, waiting. The hours dragged by, slow and heavy. Midnight came and went, and I started to think maybe I had imagined the footprints. Maybe I was just freaking myself out for no reason. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate sound. Not the wind, not an animal, something moving outside, right by the window. My blood went cold. I held my breath, listening. Footsteps, slow, careful. They stopped just outside the door. I grabbed the rifle off the wall, my hands shaking. I had no idea if it was loaded. I didn't even know how to use it properly, but holding it made me feel less helpless. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, staring at the door, waiting for it to open, but it never did. The footsteps moved away, back toward the trees, and then silence. I barely slept. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my things and left. I didn't care about breakfast, didn't even check to see if anything was missing. I just threw my bag in the truck and started the engine. The drive back felt different. The trees didn't look as beautiful anymore. The sky didn't seem as endless. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave. When I finally got back to town, I called my friend, told him what happened. He was quiet for a long time, then sighed. He told me no one had lived near that cabin for years. Said the last person to stay there before me had left early too, though they never said why. I don't know who or what was out there that night. Maybe it was just some drifter passing through. Maybe it was someone looking for a place to hide. Or maybe it was someone who had been watching the cabin for a long time, waiting for the right moment. All I know is I'll never go back. And if you ever find yourself alone in a place like that, deep in the woods, far from everything, trust your gut. Because sometimes being alone isn't the scariest thing. Sometimes you're not alone at all. I don't know why I agreed to this trip. Maybe it was the stress of work, the need to escape the dull hum of daily life. Or maybe it was the way my friend Brian talked about the place. Like it was some hidden gem, deep in the woods, untouched by the chaos of the world. Just a few days, he had said. "You need it, man." So, there I was, driving down an old dirt road, miles away from the nearest town, with nothing but the sound of my tires crunching against the gravel. The sun was setting, dipping below the thick line of trees, and the temperature had already started to drop. The cabin was supposed to be deep in the woods, away from everything, isolated, peaceful. When I finally pulled up, I was surprised by how small it was. A single-story structure made of old wood, darkened by years of harsh weather. The windows were small and the front porch sagged a little. It looked abandoned, like no one had been there in a long time. But Brian had said it was perfect. His uncle owned it and he used it for hunting. I didn't think twice about it. I grabbed my bag from the trunk and made my way to the front door, pushing it open with more force than expected. The hinges creaked loudly. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp wood and dust. It was colder than I thought it would be. There was a small fireplace in the corner, a single worn-out couch, and a wooden table with 2 chairs. The kitchen was nothing more than a sink and an old stove. There was only one bedroom with a narrow bed and a dresser. Basic, simple, enough. I unpacked quickly, setting my things down on the bed before heading back to the car to grab the firewood I had brought. The night air had gotten colder, and the sky was completely dark. No streetlights, no distant glow of a town, just pure, suffocating darkness. I lit the fireplace, watching as the flames flickered and cast long shadows along the walls. The warmth was immediate, but the feeling of unease remained. I told myself it was just the isolation. I wasn't used to being so far away from civilization. The silence was unsettling. No distant traffic, no voices, just the occasional rustling of trees outside. I tried to shake it off and settled into the couch, watching the fire dance. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of something outside. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. Footsteps, slow, cautious, close. My heart started pounding as I sat up, straining my ears. The fire had died down to a soft glow, casting just enough light to see around the room. I stayed completely still, listening. Then, nothing. Maybe it was an animal, a deer, a raccoon, something harmless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had sounded human. I stood up slowly, walking to the window. The glass was fogged, but I could make out the vague outline of the trees. Everything looked still, too still. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and flicked it on, pointing it toward the window. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and empty space. I exhaled sharply, just my mind playing tricks on me. I turned away, shaking my head, but then I heard it again, closer this time, right outside the door. I turned back quickly, my breath caught in my throat. The flashlight beam wavered slightly in my hand. I waited, listened. The sound had stopped. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't armed. I had a knife in the kitchen, but that was it. I slowly backed away from the door, my mind racing. Should I open it? See if something was there? Or just wait? Then, a sound came from the back of the cabin. A slow, deliberate knock. I froze. My entire body tensed. Someone was out there. Someone was knocking. I tried to breathe evenly, but my chest felt tight. My hands clenched into fists. Then, another knock, louder this time. I forced myself to move, stepping as quietly as I could toward the back window. I kept the flashlight off this time, not wanting to give myself away. Peering through the small glass pane, I saw nothing but darkness. But I could feel it, the presence. Someone was standing there, just beyond the edge of the window's view. I backed away slowly. My mind raced through every possibility. A lost hiker? A local? But who the hell wanders around in the middle of the night, knocking on windows? Then, something even worse happened. The doorknob turned. I heard the slow, deliberate twist of metal, like someone was testing it, seeing if it was unlocked. My stomach dropped. I rushed forward, grabbing the closest thing I could, a heavy metal fire poker, and held it in my hands like a weapon. The knob stopped moving, and the silence that followed was even worse. My ears strained, picking up the faintest sound of breathing. Whoever it was, they were still there. I wanted to call for help, but my phone was in my bag, and I wasn't even sure I had a signal this deep in the woods. My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Then, without warning, a loud bang shook the cabin. The door. They had slammed their weight against it, testing it. I took a step back, gripping the fire poker tighter. Another bang. The wood creaked. My legs felt weak, but I stayed standing, staring at the door like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I had locked it when I came in. I was sure of it, but was it strong enough? The next sound made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Not just one set, two, maybe three. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They moved around the cabin, their footsteps crunching against the leaves. Pacing, surrounding me, panic took over. I ran to my bag, grabbing my phone with shaking hands. No service. Of course, I wanted to scream, but I knew it wouldn't help. I was alone, completely alone. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The footsteps, the banging, the breathing, silence. I stood there, every muscle in my body locked in place, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. Minutes passed, then an hour. I didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly. I just waited. My grip on the fire poker had gone numb, but I didn't let go. At some point, exhaustion won. My body gave out, and I fell into an uneasy, restless sleep. When I woke up, the sunlight was streaming through the windows. Everything looked normal, like nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't a dream. The door was still locked, but there were deep scratches on the wood, long, jagged marks that hadn't been there before. I packed my things in less than 5 minutes. I didn't care about breakfast. I didn't care about anything. I grabbed my keys and practically sprinted to my car, throwing my bag into the back seat before locking myself inside. As I drove away, I refused to look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if someone was watching me leave. I never asked Brian about the cabin, never told him what happened. I didn't want to know if he had heard similar stories. I just knew one thing for sure. I would never go back. I had always wanted to get away from the city, away from the endless noise, the dull glow of streetlights, and the suffocating press of people. So when I found a listing for a remote cabin deep in the woods, it seemed perfect. No neighbors, no distractions. Just me, the trees, and quiet. The owner, an older man named Harris, had assured me over the phone that the cabin was well kept. "You'll be fine out there," he said. "Just don't go wandering too far past the property line. You don't want to get lost." The drive took longer than expected. My GPS lost signal an hour before I even reached the property, leaving me to follow printed directions that Harris had emailed me. The last stretch was a narrow dirt road with deep tire ruts and overhanging branches that scraped my car's roof. By the time I arrived, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the dense treeline. The cabin itself was simple but sturdy. A single-story structure with a slanted tin roof, a small front porch, and a woodpile stacked neatly beside the door. The windows were dusty but intact, and the door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something faintly metallic. I chalked it up to age and disuse. The place had been empty for a while, after all. I spent the first hour settling in. The cabin had no electricity, but Harris had left a stack of candles and a few oil lamps. The water pump still worked, though the first gush was brown with rust before it ran clear. I found a small wood-burning stove in the corner and a worn couch that smelled faintly of mildew. A single bedroom in the back, its bed covered in a thin, musty blanket. It wasn't luxury, but it was enough. The first night was quiet, too quiet. I hadn't realized how much I'd grown used to the hum of appliances, the distant sounds of traffic. Here there was nothing, just the occasional groan of the wind against the walls, the rustling of leaves outside. I lit a few candles, read for a while, then turned in early. I woke up to something tapping against the cabin wall. It was soft, irregular. At first, I thought it was a tree branch swaying in the wind, But when I sat up, I realized the sound was coming from the opposite side of the cabin, the side with no trees. My pulse picked up, but I told myself it had to be an animal. A raccoon, maybe, a fox, something small. I forced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I walked around the cabin, looking for any signs of what had made the noise. The ground was damp from the night's dew, but I didn't see any prints. The side of the cabin where I'd heard the tapping was undisturbed. No branches, no marks. I brushed it off and spent the day exploring the woods nearby, collecting firewood, and enjoying the isolation. That night, the tapping came again. This time, it was faster, more deliberate. I sat up in bed, my breath tight in my chest. I waited, listening. The sound moved, starting at one side of the cabin, then shifting to another. Like something or someone was circling the cabin. My stomach knotted. It had to be an animal. It had to be. Then I heard something else. A low, dragging noise against the wooden porch. I grabbed the old hunting knife I had packed, my only real weapon, and forced myself to move toward the door. I pressed my ear against it, listening. The dragging sound stopped. Then, after a long moment, I heard something new. Breathing. Slow, deep breaths, just on the other side of the door. Not an animal, not a raccoon or a fox. Something big, something standing upright. I held my breath, gripping the knife so tightly my fingers ached. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes until the breathing stopped, until the tapping didn't return. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first light crept through the trees, I stepped outside, knife in hand. The porch was empty. No footprints, no marks, but something was off. The woodpile beside the door. I had stacked it neatly before bed, but now the logs were scattered, like something had rummaged through them. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. I spent the day hiking farther from the cabin, hoping some time outside would clear my head, but the unease stayed with me. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair. I kept the knife close. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then, just past midnight, I heard footsteps. Not soft animal paws. Heavy, deliberate steps on the porch. I sat up, heart hammering. The footsteps stopped. A long silence stretched out. Then, a slow, deliberate knock on the door. I stayed frozen. The knock came again. 3 times. Then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I sat there, knife in hand, until the first light of dawn finally arrived. When I opened the door, my stomach turned to ice. Someone had carved something into the wood of the porch. Deep, jagged letters. Leave. I packed my things and left immediately. I didn't stop to clean up, didn't bother to check the rest of the cabin. I drove down that narrow dirt road faster than I should have, not stopping until I was miles away. When I finally got cell service, I called Harris, my voice shaking. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed. "You're not the first," he said. "I don't rent that cabin out for long. No one ever stays." I didn't ask anything else. I didn't want to know. I just kept driving, as far from that place as I could get. I never liked the idea of cabins. Something about them always felt too isolated, too exposed to whatever was lurking out there in the woods. But when my friend Mark offered me his family's old cabin for the weekend, I took it. I had been feeling burnt out from work, and I told myself that a few days away from people, away from noise, would do me some good. The cabin was deep in the woods, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. When I arrived, the sun was starting to set. The dirt road leading up to the cabin was rough, full of potholes and overgrown branches that scraped against my truck as I drove up. The place itself was small, built from old logs that had darkened over time. The windows were covered in dust, and the front porch creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood and mildew. There was a small kitchen, a living area with a fireplace, and a single bedroom with a bed that looked older than I was. A few old hunting magazines were scattered on a coffee table. I checked my phone, no signal. That didn't surprise me. I had expected it. The first night was uneventful. I made myself some canned soup, read for a while by lantern light, and listened to the wind outside. It was peaceful in a way I wasn't used to. The silence was thick, almost heavy, but I told myself that was part of the charm. I went to bed early. I woke up to a sound outside. At first, I thought it was an animal, just the wind pushing the trees, maybe a raccoon moving through the brush. But then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate steps moving just outside the cabin. I held my breath, straining to hear. It was pitch dark. I had locked the door before bed, but suddenly, that didn't feel like enough. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. The light bounced off the wooden walls, casting long shadows. The footsteps had stopped. I sat up in bed, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was just my imagination. I was alone in the woods. My mind was playing tricks on me. I forced myself to lie back down. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually, exhaustion won over paranoia. The next morning, I checked outside. Nothing seemed out of place. The ground was too hard to show footprints. I shook it off and went about my day, chopping some wood, reading, trying to relax. But the feeling of being watched never really left me. That night, it happened again. This time, I was awake when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, closer than before. I sat up, gripping my flashlight. I wanted to tell myself it was just an animal, but animals don't walk like that. They scurry, they scratch. These were footsteps, human footsteps. I waited, barely breathing. The steps stopped again, right outside the cabin. I sat there, frozen. If someone was out there, they weren't making any attempt to come inside. They were just standing there. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I didn't know anymore. I kept the flashlight in my hand, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Eventually, the exhaustion won again, and I must have fallen asleep at some point. The next morning, I checked the area around the cabin. Still nothing. No signs of footprints, no broken branches, nothing to prove that someone had been there. But I knew what I had heard, and I knew I wasn't making it up. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the thought of spending another night there made my stomach turn. I decided to leave that afternoon. I packed my things quickly, throwing everything into my truck. As I was locking up the cabin, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the far side of the cabin, just under the bedroom window, the grass was flattened, like someone had been standing there. For a long time, I didn't stick around. I got in my truck and drove away, faster than I should have on those rough roads. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was back in town, surrounded by people, by noise, by safety. I never told Mark what happened. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I know what I heard, and I know someone was out there that night, watching me,